I can still hear the crinkling of the newspaper. To the back seat, for me to see the newspaper completely defaced. My image, my face was circled, much in the spirit of Heath Ledger's Joker. Random things were highlighted and lines were drawn, in just the most, really defacing way, right? Like, Branham said, jazz was evil. This was not something that I went against Branham doing. This was something that my family supported because I had been having a lot of emotional problems. It's not emotional problems. I was a kid suffering severe religious trauma and abuse. And I was having trouble navigating that without resources, without education, without psychological help. And the one way I found to navigate that was music, was jazz music, was speaking, language through my saxophone. This abstract musical language that for everybody else in the world is pretty vanilla at this point. And that was my expression, my heart's cry, my soul's cry, to be heard. Because I couldn't use my words. It wasn't a safe environment to use my words. I had found this. And was character assassinated, was excommunicated. My whole family suffered the repercussions of that.
Practically every music was forbidden unless it was gospel. I'll never forget,
John, I want to speak to real quick. What else isn't forbidden? I've never heard them have a beef about Beethoven or Bach. Is it black music? I'm just posing the question. Is it black music? Because they don't tend to have a problem with any music that's rooted in European.
Yeah. And interestingly, the theme song, Only Believe, was jazz music, and it was introduced specifically by Paul Rader. He wanted a music that had a beat because it's so racist when you think of it, but he says that beat is going to be able to help entice the people in Africa and in the native countries. So it was a merging of jazz and gospel, and that's why Elvis Presley picked it up, because it was jazz and gospel, and that was his thing. But they condemned all kinds of music, and I laughed. It's a sad story you tell, but when you said people now listen to it and they don't think anything of it, I'll never forget the first time I allowed myself to listen to the Beatles. We had this way of mentally blocking things in the message in the cult. So if I was in the store, people say, "How have you never heard the Beatles?" And you're 40. When I left, I was 37 years old. "How have you never heard the Beatles?" Well, you mentally block it. You do these mental chants and things. You say these things in your head, and you're really mentally blocking it. The first time I allowed myself to listen to Paul McCartney, I was like, "You mean this is evil? I've heard so much worse than this in gospel music, man." It's just, it's so weird when you think about it.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So you have a really hard story, and like I say, I sympathize just for the simple fact that I'm a music lover, you're a music lover, we're both musicians. You're far better than me, obviously, but
I don't agree.
What we also share is you went through some dark places. A lot of people don't know this because I don't talk about it much. I went through some really dark places before, during, and after leaving, because it's just, like you said, it is spiritual abuse, psychological abuse. You mentioned you and I have talked offline about how this is just weaponized religion, but it's more than that. It is psychologically weaponized as well as religious weaponized. So you and I came through some dark places, but tell us a little bit. You've came out of this and you're doing pretty well for yourself, right?
So, John, I spoke to my excommunication, to the religious abuse that I endured in my late teens. And I did not speak to some of the harder places that I had to visit. And I believe it is the gates of hell. And I don't use that lightly. The religious abuse that I sustained took me to the place where that when I was 13 years old, I was carrying, and I'm trigger warning. I want to give a trigger warning so folks I'm going to be talking about self-harm, suicidal ideation. When I was around 13, 14, I was carrying a razor, one of those refill blades for like a Gillette, around in my wallet. And I was cutting myself in all the places that people couldn't see. Because there was no autonomy that I had in this world other than my own body and the harm that I could inflict on it. Speaking of the shame as well that this religion puts on kids and how self-hating we become in it. So it took me there. It took me to the place that when I was 13, I was putting a 22, putting a rifle underneath my head and getting more comfortable every day with the feeling of that. I had no way of navigating any of the abuse I was sustaining in a healthy way. And it took me to the gates of hell. Fast forward 13 years, 14 years from that moment, I've had a rich life and a lot of rich experiences. I've gone to many different kinds of churches. I studied Buddhism in Thailand and Myanmar. I went to college. I got exposed to a lot of different worldviews. I got to experience a lot of different ways that people in other religions are harmed by their religions. How other religions weaponize harm to hurt kids, to hurt their congregations as a form of behavior manipulation. I bolstered myself with expansion. And that's where I found hope and connection with other folks that have gone through similar things. And where I am today, after all of the therapy, this deep spiritual work, and giving myself, allowing myself the grace that we were afforded by Scripture, by the way, not grace by legalism, but grace, affording myself that has allowed me to, well, John, just be in a place of hope every day. And the world's hard, man. Geopolitics is hard. National politics is hard. Local politics is hard. There's a lot of abuse in the world. There's a lot of harm in the world. But what I know now, in my relationship to the source of goodness in our lives, is that I can be in the world and not of the world. I can show up with hope in a hopeless world. I show up as a voice for love and hope in cynicism and despair. I can be that person. I can be that voice. And I can transform conversations with other people that might have a cynical or violent or hateful heart position. I can transform those conversations to where they are in touch with their humanity and with my humanity and with the humanity of other people. I think through grace, I have been transformed over the past 14 years. And anyway, this might be getting off topic, but I encourage you, if you're in this kind of religion, give yourself grace. Allow the grace that Scripture has afforded us to yourself, because it's just right there. It's just right there. You know, you can just have it. Like, you don't have to. You can just have it. So, so, so accept it, and see where that takes you. Allow yourself to be wrong sometimes. Allow yourself to learn.
It's the harsh truth that is points of view. There are castles in the sky for dreamers like you.
Such an amazing story. I mean, you've been through the darkest of places and on top of the world, it seems now, and it's exciting to hear somebody who has been there and has been to hell and back.
John, thanks so much. It's been a ride, and I haven't had. I've been through hopeless moments in it. You know, life is just hard, and it's hard for everybody.